Hello, my name's Dan Graves. As a pastor of 25 years, I've seen many families struggle to make sense of the death of a loved one or try to understand a tragedy that's disrupted their lives. They ask questions like, why did this happen to my son? Why my family? As a father whose son died from an inoperable brain tumor on June 5th of 2019, I know how easily these questions can overtake your mind. Proverbs 20:24 says that a person's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand their own way? If you believe God directs a person's steps, and I do, how then can we hope to understand our path in life? How can I understand what the Creator of heaven and earth has planned for my life or the life of my son? As I look back on all that took place, I think the best many of us can hope for in times of crisis is to see God making clear the way. So may I suggest that instead of focusing on questions that may never get answered or events that may never be understood, focus on comforting the one whose life is ending or being changed forever, and then look for signs that God's in it with you. The neurosurgeon in our local ER suggested Aaron and Jessica go to Duke. Well, the next day we headed off to Duke and they asked me to drive them up there. The first time I saw God's hand guiding us through this crisis was when we entered the ER at Duke. There were only 2 or 3 people waiting. So we were waited on immediately. And when has that ever happened in an ER, let alone one as busy as Duke's? So the nurse asked Aaron, how can I help? Aaron said, I think I have a brain tumor. And she kind of smiled and said, why do you think you have a brain tumor? So he handed her the disc with his MRI on it. So then she asked him, who do you want to see? Aaron said, Dr. Friedman. Aaron's friend Caleb had suggested we ask for Dr. Freeman because Dr. Freeman was the surgeon who removed a brain tumor from Ted Kennedy. Well, at that, the nurse kind of chuckled and said, everyone wants Dr. Friedman. You'll have to take whoever's on call. Well, who do you think was on call? Dr. Friedman. Another door got opened. Now, I don't remember exactly when this next God sighting took place, but it was during our initial visit to Duke. Aaron was on the phone talking to a friend he had made a couple of years earlier while he was on a tour. After his gig, Aaron got a migraine. So this guy was at the show. He had an apartment right in the area and told Aaron he should just go to his apartment so Aaron could get out of all the noise and rest. Well, the next morning, Aaron and this guy had a discussion about heaven and earth, God and reality. You know, one of those existential versus metaphysical debates people like to get into. Turns out this guy became a professor at Harvard. He was on the phone trying to convince Aaron to go to Harvard instead of Duke. Aaron told him he was comfortable with the people at Duke, so this friend told Aaron to email all the results from Duke to Harvard so he could get the neurologist at Harvard to give a second opinion. Now, if it's not enough for God to provide Aaron with one of the best brain surgeons in the U.S., he provided a second opinion from Harvard. How crazy is that? I think there are times in life when we fail to see or understand the wonderful things God does for us. Nancy and I were just talking about this just the other night during one of our screened-in porch therapy sessions. We look at Aaron's death from a parent's perspective, Jessica from a wife's, and Elvie from a daughter's. We all call it a loss. God looks at Aaron's death from his perspective and calls it a homecoming. We forget that God did not create us for this life we live. He created us to walk with Him in the garden, to have a relationship with Him, to sit in a screened-in porch enjoying one another's company and conversation. God didn't intend life to be so painful. These struggles we face and the losses we experience through death are the results of Adam and Eve's decision to disobey God. God had a plan for them and their lives in the garden. Adam and Eve thought they had a better plan. God had a plan for Aaron's life here on earth. Nancy and I thought, and we still kind of think, that we had a better plan. Let Aaron grow old with his wife and kids. As we look back, though, we're beginning to realize that we really can't understand God's plan. I think trying to understand why it happened makes it harder to deal with the fact that it did happen. Admitting that God directs my steps and I can't really understand the way my life is going, it's not a cop-out. It's a reminder that if I can't really understand what God is doing in my life, how can I make sense of what God was doing in Aaron's? I'm thankful God made this clear to me a couple of months before the doctors found Aaron's brain tumor. It helped me to avoid focusing on the whys and instead focusing on being there for Aaron and Jessica, driving them around, making sure they made all their appointments, reminding them to eat, getting a hotel so they could relax and rest as the days dragged on. Remember, God uses people to comfort those who are hurting, and sometimes those who are hurting are called on to provide God's comfort for others. Next time I'll sit down with Mitch Smith, director of St. Martin's in the Fields Episcopal Church. We'll talk about what to say to someone who's grieving over the loss of a loved one. Until then, I'm Dan.